want to welcome you all to our second forum on economic issues here in Missoula. I'm Mike Cadis, I'm the mayor. First of all, just let me introduce the various sponsors of this, the different entities that have worked together to try to pull these forums together, and hopefully will help us continue to do that. But the City of Missoula, the County of Missoula, the Center for the Rocky Mountain West, the Montana Community Development Corporation, the Missoula Area Economic Development Corporation, and the University of Montana. And that's kind of been our core group in terms of trying to put together and facilitate these discussions. MCAT is filming us today, and they will broadcast it at some point. I'm not quite sure when. But Craig Holtorf is the cameraman and general dishwasher and everything else. He's back here. He asked that when we do break out into the smaller groups, that if you can speak up, do so that he can pick up the dialogue on the microphone. And of course, then I'll ask that when we break out to the smaller groups that you not be too loud, because it could confuse the other groups as well. So we'll just start off with a contradiction and work our way around it. We're all used to that, and part of the process. Hopefully you've seen the agenda and have a pretty good idea of, or at least some idea of what we're trying to do today. I want to take a few minutes to let you know where we've been. First of all, this is not just something that's happening in Missoula, but is a series of discussions that's been happening around the state. And we are kind of into phase 2 of this. Most of the other larger cities in the state will be doing that as well. Almost all of them have now had kind of phase 1, which was a background of the kind of economic geography of the area that they are the hub for. And so don't think that we're doing this in isolation. We are trying to work with other communities, and while a big part of our focus is to come out of meetings like this with a local agenda, that doesn't mean that there aren't components that are part of a statewide agenda too. So just keep that in mind as you discuss ideas and opportunities for action. Where we've been is, you gotta be careful how you don't go too fast, is I just briefly want to cover some of the territory we covered about 6 months ago. And just looking at the state, but particularly at our region, and looking at the issue of growth, you see that a lot of growth on the 93 corridor in western Montana, from Kalispell, Missoula, and up the Bitterroot. And then the other central area has been the Bozeman area, where they have experienced significant growth, and the vicinities around Bozeman. And then of course Billings is not growing as fast as the western Montana and Bozeman area, but is still moving along pretty rapidly. And then of course we're all familiar with what's been happening in eastern Montana, a general decline and emptying out that is part of the problem that we in western Montana have to continue to be aware of and cognizant of, particularly in its political dimensions. One of the big problems that we have from a state perspective is that we really have very different realities depending on where we live, and very different concerns. And so it becomes important to understand what's going on in other parts of the state in order for them to have any sympathy for your concerns here in western Montana. We're all getting older. We all know this, but collectively it's happening as well. And it's not an unusual phenomenon. We see it in the US, in Montana, and then in our local counties. Missoula County seems to be aging a little slower than some other places, but that is a general trend. And that has lots of effects on retailing, on housing, all kinds of things, how we recreate, just something to keep in the back of your mind. Most of the growth in Montana has been focused around urban areas. And if you look at the dark black lines, these are county numbers. So you got Yellowstone, Cascade, Lewis and Clark, Gallatin, Silver Bow, Missoula, and Flathead. And then, and clearly that's where the primary growth is happening. You look at the next rank down, the closely linked counties. So for Missoula, that would be Mineral, Lake, Granite, and Ravalli, are also seeing a fair amount of growth, but not as much as is happening in the core urban areas. And then you can see what happens if you aren't next to a core, you aren't a core urban area and you're not next to one. It is particularly difficult in those areas where you see actual declines over time. Employment growth reflects the same kind of thing, the same kind of patterns. Interesting here is you can see that the closely linked counties are growing in terms of employment at a more rapid rate than are the regional centers. But then if we look at it in terms of income, that relationship actually reverses itself. Income is growing at a faster level at the regional centers than it is at the closely linked counties. Not to get lost in that detail, the big picture here is that, again, the growth is happening in urban areas and those places that are associated with urban areas. To break it down to another level, a little finer, most of the growth is focused in the service sector, some in retail trade. Manufacturing has been declining fairly significantly. For Western Montana, that is very much timber products. See various ups and downs in other things, but the big story here is that manufacturing is on a declining trend and services are increasing. To put that in some perspective, look at these two slides. The top slide is the one that we just showed. The bottom slide is for the Rocky Mountain West, one of the fastest growing regions in the country. And what you see is that we are tracking pretty careful on the same trajectory as what's going on in the Rocky Mountain West. Again, it's being led by services. Manufacturing has not declined as fast as it has in the Missoula area. That's probably because we are so focused on wood products. The manufacturing base throughout the Rocky Mountain West is much more diverse and as a consequence probably quite a bit more stable. But still, you see that even in one of the two fastest growing regions in the country, manufacturing is declining. The only other thing that's really important there is that local government is bigger in the Rocky Mountain West than it is here. I say that seriously too. I think that local government has a pretty important role to play in economic growth, and if we don't make the right investments, we won't get the kind of growth that we're hoping for. Again, to look at the region and do some comparisons and the country, just focusing on population change, you see Missoula County actually looks quite a bit more like the Rocky Mountain West than it does Montana. And that's just another, again, to look at that huge dichotomy that exists within our state. To drill down a little deeper and just look at the various subsectors that are growing and those that aren't, I think we know pretty clearly that healthcare services has been a huge engine of growth. Business services is interesting. That's number 3 in our group. If you look at the same graph for the Rocky Mountain West, business services is the one that leads. So that tells me that's a place where we have some opportunities. Again, you get a sense of these services. It's important, I think, to note that a lot of these are services, and we tend to give services a bad name because they don't pay enough. If you look at these types of services, what you see, the kinds of jobs that are associated in these types of services are generally pretty well-paying jobs. So that myth that all services are kind of a bunch of burger flippers, I think hopefully gets abused in this kind of a look at our economy. On the bottom end, again, you see lumber and wood products really having a difficult time. Hopefully that has stabilized. That's one of the things that is in one of our groups today that we'll talk about. But the fact of the matter is there's been fairly significant decline over time in that sector. The other thing that we talked a little bit about is poverty rates, and what you see is actually a fairly dynamic situation, one that reflects difficult times throughout the 80s, some improvement in the 90s over that, but still some pretty big numbers. The way we concluded our last meeting was we did a bunch of brainstorming in breakout groups after having Larry Swanson give us a pretty in-depth view of the economy. And after we got all done, a bunch of us sat down and took all that brainstorming, and this is kind of how we arranged it. This is kind of the way it seemed to fall out. And we took this list then, and that's how we got to where we are today. And really what our strategy was, we tried to find areas today, and we have a fairly narrow and focused number of topic areas. And we did that on purpose because what we thought would be the most helpful is, rather than kind of getting off into kind of a large esoteric conversation about the economy, we really wanted to focus in on some areas. And we felt that, okay, here are 4 areas that are still relatively broad, but first of all, we can focus on them, and second, there are some opportunities that we think are happening in these areas. And that's what our panel and the white papers will try to outline a little bit and try to get the discussion going. But really, what we're hoping for today is that through the breakout groups, you all will be able to help us and yourselves focus in on some very doable things. And what we're thinking about is things that we can accomplish and that need to be accomplished over the next 12 months. So we're trying to get pretty practical about this. Now, that may be a little difficult for us to do, because I know from knowing many of you in the room is that you kind of have pretty big views and very diverse views about our community. And so the tendency to go off in other directions will be immense. And not that we want to discourage that too much, but we do. So we're kind of, our request as the organizing group is that you really try to stay focused. Now, what we're going to do in each of these breakout groups is, if there are other ideas that you think that are things that we really ought to be following up on, bring them up in the breakout group, and we're going to have kind of a separate page for those. And we'll compile all those afterwards and hopefully be able to report back and say, okay, here are some other things that it seems like there's some critical mass out there that's ready to move forward. But we're trying to avoid spending a lot of time focusing on other areas, unless there's a critical mass in your group that just wants to take it that way, and away you go, and you'll take your facilitator screaming and kicking, and we're all flexible and we can handle that. The other thing that we're trying to do in the format that we've got today is that we're starting out with this big group and kind of a broader overview, and then we're going to break out into these groups. And you notice that we didn't give you absolute say over which group you're in. We tried to direct that, and we did 2 reasons for that. One is we don't want one group to be really big and the others to be really small. We want to have a similar number of folks in each group. But the other is we're really looking for some cross-group thinking. We think that the opportunities that we have are much more easily exploited if we're able to work with a broad diversity of people. We think there are enough issues where we have different views of the same problem or different solutions that end up focusing on a similar problem, that we want to create the opportunity for those discussions to happen. So keep that in mind as you go through your discussions, because we're trying to do that by having this panel. Then we're going to kind of get more focused with the breakout groups, but then we're going to come back, and again, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that everybody is able to bring their expertise to the issue areas that they weren't particularly a part of, because we think there are a lot of things that are going across these different groups, and those are the types of things we really need to look for, and try to take advantage of. We would ask you also to kind of just keep one question in the back of your mind and be thinking about it, so that, because we'll ask you at the end of the day, is this helpful? I mean, is this a good use of our time? If it isn't, please be frank with us and let us know. You know, we like wasting our own time, you know, almost as much as we like wasting your time. So we really don't want to do that. And so if you have suggestions about how we can do this differently, or how we can do it better, then we definitely want to hear that. One of the challenges that we faced in this is, okay, how do we create or institutionalize a dialogue that we think is important so that it goes on into the future, and so that it's not kind of necessary for the mayor or the county commissioners or somebody to kind of be making it happen all the time. And so that's one of the things we'd ask you to be thinking about. Along those lines, now, I'm going to give you an example of an idea that I have that I think is the kind of thing that could come up in any one of these groups. And it also happens to be an idea that will help institutionalize this kind of a discussion. But I say it as an example. I mean, I also want to pitch the idea, but also give it as an example of the kind of thing that would be nice to see coming out of the different breakout groups. City clubs are an institution that have been around the United States for nearly 100 years. The Cleveland City Club, I think, was started about 1912. Portland has a very active one, and I'm marginally familiar with it because I have a cousin who's on the board. But it does a number of things. It's been around long enough that it is really an institution within the city of Portland. One of the key things it does is it has Friday forums, and that's essentially an opportunity where they will, through a speakers committee, invite a speaker to come in. You get 20 to 25 minutes to make your pitch, and then you're subjected to 15 to 20 minutes of questions of all kinds. And you don't get to say no to any questions. I mean, it is a very honest and above-board civic dialogue, and it's meant to be that way. And because it happens every week, you don't have to go every week, but you always know there's a discussion there to be had that has something to do with your community, and some are more interesting and some are less, but it's institutionalized. It just kind of keeps going. The other nice part of what Portland does is they have, they create committees for issues, and they will they'll put together a group of people of diverse interests, but you know, people like yourselves who are knowledgeable about things and energetic about the community, and they'll focus in on an issue, and they will just go after it for a specific period of time, and then they'll make a report back to the larger group, which ultimately becomes a report back to the community. And by doing that, they're able to really create and amass not only a lot of technical information, but a lot of just savvy and common sense around that issue, and put it on paper and create a dialogue around that, so that the community as a whole has a place to kind of hook into difficult issues, a place that, you know, it offers a little bit of a foundation, but allows the community to go on and hopefully get to some closure on issues, or at least not tear themselves to pieces. So that's just one of those ideas. It's one that I propose. I'm interested in seeing if we can't put something together like a Missoula City Club in order to help facilitate these kind of discussions, something that will go on over time. With that, my slideshow is over. We have a panel here, and hopefully you've all had a chance to review the white papers that we sent out. Rosalie, are you going to start? Russ is going to start? Okay, so I'll just turn it over to the panel. We'll take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll move to the breakout groups.
I'd like to thank Mayor Cadis and all the supporters for putting this together. I think Missoula is an absolutely incredible place, and the more that we can create dialogues like this, I think the better the future of Missoula will be. What? Well, you did, I thought. Oh. I'm Russ Fletcher. I'm the founder of the Montana Associated Technology Roundtables. And we do a minor version of this. We get together about once a month and just network with people. And I think over the last 3 years, 4 years or so that I've been doing this, it's had some pretty beneficial effects for hopefully a lot of people in the state of Montana. What I wanted to do is kind of follow up with some discussions that we've been having over the last probably year or so since the state decided to focus on two specific clusters of economic development. The first one was the wood-based products. The other one was the creative enterprise. And if you think about that at the very beginning, creative enterprise, okay, that's the arts. That's the authors. That's the artists. And Missoula stands head and shoulders above many other parts of the country. I mean, we're well known as being one of the most vibrant communities. I don't know if you saw it, but Men's Health, Men's Journal, I believe it was, just voted Missoula #1 in the nation for small communities because of its vibrancy. One of the things they didn't include in the Missoulian article, Mike, was that a quote was in there from James Lee Burke, and he said, Missoula has ruined many careers. People come here and then they do everything they can to stay. And I think that's kind of a challenge for us. We have an incredible opportunity here, but how can we really start maximizing the cachet that is Montana, I think. And one of the things I wanted to try and focus on is creativity. Webster's defines it as the ability to create meaningful new forms. And it's now the single most important source of competitive advantage to a place. Carly Fiorina, she's the CEO of HP. She told a group of the nation's governors, keep your tax incentives and highway interchanges. We'll go where the highly skilled and creative people are. Whenever I'm talking to an entrepreneur, it's pretty evident that ideas are like belly buttons. We all have at least one. But they never go anywhere unless you have a group of people that can help you develop that. You have a network, you have a community to do that. Our ever-evolving society holds great promise. We are growing economic and social systems that tap human creativity and value it more highly than ever before. This gives us unlimited opportunities to raise our living standards, build a more humane and sustainable economy, and make our lives and our children's lives more complete. Economic growth and success is a complex process. For most of our country's history, wealth came from a place's endowment of natural resources, like fertile lands or an abundance of easily gathered natural raw materials. Even then, the real money came from the value-added processing of those materials and not just the harvesting. Creativity was needed to maximize this value. But today, we see that the key natural resource, creative people, is highly mobile. Human creativity is the greatest economic resource available to any place. The wealth generated by this creative sector is huge. I would say it probably dwarfs manufacturing and many others by a long shot, if you start really looking into what is creativity. And this is something about Missoula, and I think it's really important here. The shift in the late 1800s and the early 1900s from an agricultural to an industrial economy generated incredible disruption and social turmoil. Massive relocations of people from farm to factory, from the scattered rural areas to the growing urban centers. This movement brought social problems, ranging from major changes in workplace environments to increased crime, congestion, and disease in the places where people congregated. We are facing many of these challenges today in a different way, in a different scale. The real goal of our time should be to maximize the possibilities that are available by this movement towards a creative focus, to build a better creative society that can focus and maximize the creative energy we have unleashed and limit and hopefully remove much of the turmoil and disruption that it generates. Creative people should be able to do this. Creative people don't cluster where the jobs are. Think about that just for a minute. It's a real change, and it's ongoing on a daily basis. They go to places that are the center of creativity and where they can find the quality of life that they're looking for. The most successful places welcome all kinds of people, including people willing to question the status quo, not just in economics. In 2002, Wall Street Journal did a survey of 4,000 new college graduates. 3/4 of them said that they were moving to a place where they wanted to live and not to a place that just had a job. By its nature, the new economy gives everyone the opportunity to create their own job, whether it is in a large established company or in a startup. Living in a place where this is actively encouraged is crucial to the future of place. People are constantly striving to find themselves and be themselves, to find challenging and rewarding work, and to live in those communities that can let them fully utilize their identities and live as complete and fulfilled people. People hopefully not having to commute an hour and a half each way. The concept of place is the key economic and social organizing unit of our time. It is a place that solves the age-old economic dilemma, matching people to jobs, jobs to people. Places provide and encourage the mating markets that enable people to find and interact with others and to find life partners. Place provides the environment that helps encourage and nurture human creativity and turn it into economic value. Long-standing models say that economic success comes from companies, jobs, or technology, but they're incomplete. While technology is important, and I can attest to that, there are other important aspects that must be present. Talent, not human capital, as usually measured by numbers of people holding higher education credentials, but creative capital, which is talent measured functionally by the numbers of people actually working in creative occupations. Another aspect is tolerance. Places that are open and tolerant have an edge in attracting different kinds of people, including those who test the boundaries of conventional thought. And the place must imbue them with the concept of communicating, networking, and collaboration. The economy is shifting daily, and technology improves by the minute. Information flow is crucial to keeping the competitive intelligence that is necessary for success. No one person, place, or region can hope to succeed without actively developing and encouraging relationships with others outside of the place. The key dimension of economic competitiveness for a place is the ability to attract, cultivate, and mobilize this creative resource. The creative process blooms in places that provides an environment which nurtures and supports creativity and channels it into innovation, business startups, and eventual significant economic growth and a rising standard of living. There's an active and growing group that I belong to that focuses on this and calls it economic gardening, sowing the seeds of creativity and then reaping the benefits of homegrown produce. This is a challenging and ever-evolving concept, but one community about a year ago came together to develop a manifesto, and I hope all of you got that as you walked in. If you didn't, please get a copy, or it's up on my website. But the Memphis Manifesto, I think, provides some interesting ideas, some concepts that we could all learn from and perhaps learn to adapt or modify into something that we could see here in Missoula. Hopefully our discussions today and in the future will help us all better understand the incredible possibilities of our place and how we can proactively manage our future to be the kind of community we want it to be for today, tomorrow, and beyond. Thanks. Should we try this?
One of us will get electrocuted.
Is that okay? He's running up here. It's working for me if it's working for you. Okay. I also wanted to thank everybody that had a hand in putting this on. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us all to get together and talk about the future of Missoula. Before I go on, though, I will introduce myself. I am Debbie Austin, the Forest Supervisor on the Lolo National Forest, which is the national forest that surrounds Missoula, excuse me, and a lot of adjacent communities and counties. So Russ talked a lot about sort of the intellectual and creative place that Missoula is. What I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about is sort of the physical space, and it goes a little bit beyond physical, but what is the surroundings of Missoula? What are those surroundings, and how do they affect what Missoula is and why people come here? I really believe that, I kind of like that quote in the beginning, that Missoula has ruined a lot of careers because people come here and don't want to leave. My guess there's several of you in the audience that fit that bill. I know I came to Missoula and I really would not like to leave either. But Missoula really is a special place, and one of the reasons of that are the natural resources that surround us. It's the city and the county land, the state land, and certainly the national forest that surrounds this area that gives it a lot of character and a lot of the reason why people come here and want to stay here. So really, what does that have to do with the economy? Yeah, it's a pretty place. But there's been a lot of studies that have been done recently that show that people come to live in an area, they bring their businesses to an area, they want to work in an area because of the amenities that it has to offer. And the natural resources and those related amenities, I think, are extremely important to the economy of Missoula now and in the future. Those studies talk about things like people coming to an area for the quality of life, for the open space, for the recreation opportunities, and all those things that you do when you're not working or when you're looking out your window when you are at work. Another important part of that is tourism. A lot of people come here for a lot of the same reasons that we all live here. They come here for the beauty of the mountains, the clean air, the clean water, and all of those things that open space and public land offers us. It was talked a little bit about wood products and the decline in timber and wood product manufacturing. There needs to be a balance in the commodity production and use of natural resources that we have so abundant around us, and then the amenities side of why people are here, and really the aesthetic and scenic beauty. And I think we need to take a lot of time and think about what is that balance and how does it all fit here in Missoula. There's a couple of current opportunities right now that are going on, which was one of the reasons I was so excited about being involved in this. The Lolo National Forest, along with the Bitterroot National Forest and the Flathead National Forest, are currently in the process of revising our national forest plans. And a forest plan, and I've got a copy of our old one if anybody's interested in it, but it's somewhat like a zoning document for the national forest. It determines what each piece of land, what the allocations for each piece of land are, and how that piece of land will be managed for such things such as recreational opportunities, wildlife habitat, timber production, fisheries, just a myriad of things. But it basically sets out the future direction for the management of the 2.1 million acres of the Lolo National Forest and the other forests that I talked about as well. We started that effort several months ago. Some of you have been involved in that. I see some familiar faces from some of our meetings. But right now we're in the process. We've just gotten a lot of public feedback on our initial proposal, and we're in the process of developing alternative ways that we might look at managing the Lolo in the future. So I'm here really to hear from you and how you would like to be involved in the future of the Lolo National Forest, which again, both directly, if you own a business that somehow participates on the Lolo National Forest, or indirectly might affect a business or the economy of the community, just again by the aesthetics and the fish and wildlife that are abundant. The issues that we're looking at in forest plan revision, the biggest issues we've determined so far are access, and that's such things as roads, where we have motorized access, where it's only by hiking, where it's only by perhaps motorcycles or all-terrain vehicles or horses or bicycles or all those sorts of things, and how much of it should be accessible by some sort of a developed route. We're looking at ecosystem management. How does the whole system fit together in terms of fish and wildlife and people and vegetation and all of that? A very important issue, which you all learned, I think, probably quite a bit about last year, is the urban interface. How are we going to manage those lands where people have built their homes or developments up against the boundaries of these public lands in terms of things not just fire suppression and prevention, but that's extremely important, but also in terms of things like access and where do we put sewer ponds and where do we put all the infrastructure that goes along with that development. The three other issues are forest products. I talked a little bit about that. How do we balance the ability to use some of those natural resources that we have so readily available with, again, the interest in maintaining the aesthetic beauty and fish and wildlife habitat? Recreation management was another big issue. How much and where, how developed, how undeveloped. They're huge questions that there is no right answer. Everybody has an opinion, and it's going to be our job to try to take all those opinions and come together with the best, quote, zoning that we can for the Lola National Forest. And the last issue that we're looking at there is wilderness areas designation and roadless areas, which kind of fits in with some of the other categories. So that's one of the opportunities and one of the reasons I'm so excited about being here. There's plenty of others. The city of Missoula and the county of Missoula has been extremely proactive in acquiring open space and recreational lands, which I think is a wonderful thing and really, really builds on and provides that sense of place and what Missoula is all about and why people want to come here and might want to bring their businesses here. So we need to talk about the big picture. We need to look at Missoula from the city center all the way out to the lands that we all recreate on and that our visitors recreate on. And how does that fit together and have a sense of what that's going to look like and what opportunities will be available so that each of our actions independently will lead us towards that common goal. So that's what our group will be talking about today. And I'll be around also today if you have any questions. If you're not in our group and would like to get involved, this is my commercial. You can certainly come and talk to me. We'd like to have as many people involved as possible. But again, Missoula is an incredibly special place, and a lot of it has to do with our natural surroundings. I would believe that most of us are here in Missoula today as at least a small part, if not a large part because of that. So with that, I will turn it over to Rosalie and pass the microphone. Thank you. Kind of fun? Does that work? I'm Rosalie Cates. I'm the Executive Director of Montana Community Development Corporation. We provide capital and entrepreneurial supports to companies in mostly western Montana. And we do that in order to provide economic opportunity for people who live here. My topic is the workforce breakout group. I feel like I'm kind of promoting us. We're going to have ice cream, cake, we're going to dance. It's really going to be fun in this breakout. You didn't know that, did you, Mike? I feel a sense of competition because Russ mentioned something, mating markets. Did you guys all catch that? That sounded more interesting than what we're doing. I thought I'd just give you kind of an overview of what's going on in workforce, and you probably noticed that I'm a peripheral player in the workforce element, so I've drawn together contributions from Bob Fraser from U of M, Paul Williamson from College of Technology, Dick King at Missoula Area Economic Development Corporation, Jim Clark, K-12 system, Wolfgang Amitsbichler, whose name we all just want to say all the time, at the Montana Job Service, and Steve Witz here at the hospital. So thank you to all of them. This is really their wisdom. Here's the anatomy of workforce development. The central players are the schools, and they kind of cover this spectrum of time in your life, K-12, U of M, College of Technology, and adult ed. So you've got the school group of players, and then you have these specific workforce programs. And that's the biggest one is Montana Job Service, which provides a lot of retraining services to individual workers, but then they also work with businesses, trying to get businesses to have good jobs and know how to work with employees. And then there's some other players in that sort of workforce programs. For instance, Missoula Area Economic Development Corp has workforce training funds, and they can help a business create a training program. And we have specialized programs like the YWCA. There's probably others that I'll omit that might work with a particular population. So that's kind of the people who work with workers. And then the last player, if you will, in workforce is employers. And the hospital is a good one, and Steve Witz helped me to understand this for this. They have essentially three ways to deal with a skill need within the business. They can train an existing employer through on-the-job or informal stuff. They can train an existing employee with schools or some kind of a program or a certification. Or they can recruit. We should all remember that. They can also recruit. I thought that was kind of interesting. So the employers are another player. So you've kind of got schools, workforce programs, and employers, and this is the three people that are shuffling us, the worker, around over the course of our life. What's the importance of this area? It's important to workers because it's a pretty well established fact that the more training and education you have, the better your income. So more money.
It's important to businesses because without a worker who can make your product or deliver the service that you do, you just don't have a business. So employers and businesses are always just needing that workforce in order to have something to sell. It's very important to the community, and this came out really strongly in our group. A highly skilled workforce is a source of competitive advantage for a community. And then if you're the mayor and city council or the county commission, those are the people that pay taxes. So it's a big source of prosperity for your community. And then schools and the school system, having a quality, especially I think K-12 and university resource, is another source of competitive advantage for your community. It makes workers want to move here, and it makes businesses want to locate here. So everything kind of gets woven together pretty quickly in the workforce area, but it's a really important area for Missoula, and it came out in our first forum. In our group, we're going to talk about specifically, all the groups are going to do this, what are the top couple of things we could do in the next 12 months are in this area? And you have a bulleted list that begins our conversation in the white paper that was given out on workforce. But the themes that really came out, I think, were customization. We're not in a one-size-fits-all world anymore for workforce training. You know, all of us know that degree we got ages ago. Mine's in forestry. You know, has a lot to do with what I do now every day. I still can't see the forest for the trees, probably. So customization is a big word, and the whole system needs to be geared up to provide customization for all those players in workforce. The other is agility. Wolfgang Amensprichler brought this out. When a worker is laid off, that person needs a system to help her or him very quickly. I want to get a new job very fast. I don't want to spend 4 years and then come out at the other end of the funnel. So agility is really important. And then the last one, and I'm sure this is universal in all of our topics, is linkages. You know, it's kind of before, you went to K-12 and the schools handed you off to the high school or to the college. Then the college handed you off to an employer. And you hope to stay there for the rest of your life and never need any more education again. But now you've got this real dynamic thing going on where we're kind of throughout our lives intersecting with the workforce training system, if you will, all the time. And so the linkages between all those parts are really important. And that was really brought up as a kind of a hurdle that we're still a little bit in silos as far as doing our job within the system. So that'll be what we talk about in our group, and I really look forward to working with you there. Thank you.
My group is on infrastructure, something that I get to deal with on a fairly regular basis. We had assistance in drafting our white paper from John Crowley of Washington Group, Nick Hoffman of WGM, Janet Stevens in my office, and Gene Curtis in the County Commissioners. Is that not on?
It's on with a bad battery.
Rosie couldn't be worse. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'll just keep going then. One thing about these white papers, we did design them so that you could keep them with you. And we left a little space on the side so that you can put some notes there. Now, the sacrifice we had to make was that now the typeface is so small that you can't read it. But, like we were saying, there's trade-offs. Okay. He says just turn it down and feedback. Where's the volume? With respect to infrastructure, I think that the main kind of overriding environmental issue is growth. I mean, that's what's happening. And it creates a number of infrastructure challenges that we have to deal with. Now, we take that for granted. I mean, that's just been part of our life for the last 10 or 15 years now. But imagine if you were in Butte or in Great Falls. It would not be the same discussion by any means. And so help us broaden our perspective a little bit to understand that our problems are not nearly the same as the problems faced by a lot of other communities. Transportation is a huge issue. It is phenomenally expensive and also incredibly important, particularly vehicular transportation. We have just been in the process of trying to do the work that it'll take to fix one of our main arterials. That would be Russell Street from Broadway to Mount. We've been 2 years in an EIS that cost us a couple of $1 million. What the numbers come back is going to cost us, just to fix that stretch, at least $30 million. Probably, closer to 35. Well, we have an allocation from the state of about $2.4 million a year in what we call urban funds, and then we get some congestion mitigation and air quality funds in the neighborhood. We're getting close to $1 million. So say we have $2.5 million a year. Well, it takes us 10 or 15 years to resolve one problem if we don't spend any money on anything else. And it's not an option for us. So funding is a huge problem. We're better off than we used to be in that we have better control over this, and that's as a result of the federal legislation. ICE-T was the first set about 12 years now. But the costs of the fixes are incredible, and we are working in an environment where we have more vehicles because we have more people, and everyone who's driving is driving more than they were driving before. So the number of vehicle trips per person continues to increase. So we're growing in two different ways, and ultimately it's questionable whether we'll be able to keep up with that in an overall kind of picture, particularly in the growing parts of our community. Areas that feed into reserve are classic here. We have a viable public transportation system in Mountain Lion, but they are funded from a millage that is capped, and which provides about half of their revenue. For Mountain Lion to really be effective, it would have to probably operate at least kind of twice its current operating levels. So instead of 30-minute waits, you had only 15-minute waits. And that is a huge economic step forward to do that. Right now, the system is largely used by those who don't have any other choice. And so making it become a more important part of our economic system as opposed to just our social system is a huge step and something that we need to work on. Our airport is dynamic and growing. Kind of missed the static. And there's a lot good coming out of the airport, but there are conflicts as well. Noise conflicts and land conflicts. I mean, the airport is essentially in the area where much of the next new round of growth is going to occur in Missoula. And we have to do some serious planning to deal with that, both to make room for new housing so that our housing costs stay reasonable and we can accommodate what a popular place we are, but at the same time maintaining one of these economic linchpins, and that's good quality air transportation. Wastewater has been just an amazing issue for Missoula. I mean, almost all of Missoula has been built on seepage pit and septic systems. Even this area, the area just across the river, it wasn't built with a sewer system initially. Houses on quarter-acre and less lots were all built with a hole dug in the backyard, and somebody dumped a car and a pipe into the car and buried the thing over. And then 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, we came back and retrofitted with sewer. And that's how this city has grown. And we continue to do that, and it continues, because we do it that way, it creates immense political problems, because it's more expensive, and because now you put in that infrastructure that allows even higher density, and people go through the roof over it. We have to find some ways of dealing with that issue in terms of planning and being out in front of having to do all these retrofits. We've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years doing that, but if any of you who read the papers understand how politically charged this issue is, and it continues to be. The water system is owned privately. There have been issues with the water system and being able to expand as fast as the growth. Those issues oftentimes relate back to the regulatory process that the water system exists within, is another arena that we need to pay attention to. Parks and open space. If you look at Missoula, we just adopted a major parks plan for the valley. It's something that was adopted by both the city and the county unanimously. Someone must have been asleep. It's a real compliment to the folks, to the group that worked on it, and to the staff that put it together, that we were actually able to put together a plan of that kind of magnitude. But one of the fundamental things that came out in that plan is that people really love their parks, and the older part of the city has a great set of parks. But as we grow, we haven't been able to match that level of quality and quantity. And it's something, particularly as we see ourselves in this growth phase, we will need to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to have parks as new neighborhoods are developed. And right now, I can't say that we have the tools to be able to do that. The gas and electricity system might be something some of you are interested in. I know a few of us who are. I have concerns about where it's going, and spending a lot of energy trying to see if there are opportunities that are more community-based for that critical piece of our infrastructure. Communications, there's been so much evolution in how we communicate, particularly electronically, that we're always wondering how far behind are we in relation to what's going on in other parts of our country and the world. And so it's a place where opportunities continue to happen, and where there is the opportunity for tremendous economic failure, a la Touch America. But it's a critically important part of where we go in the future, and something we need to pay attention to. Urban services, as some of the slides I showed you point out, urban areas are pretty critical to the economy of Montana. Having a city is really important. It, in a way, is the new natural resource that we use to exploit. Well, if we can't maintain our cities, and the city is more than just the city government, but if we can't maintain our cities, we're going to have problems over the long term. They aren't as nice of places to live. People will have less desire to come and be a part, do what you're doing, take an afternoon and sacrifice it to try to figure out, well, how can I help my community? What's important? And right now, our city, as with all Montana cities, faces an interesting crunch. Our revenues, about 50% of our general fund revenues, are property taxes. And those property taxes can increase at about 1% a year, 50% of inflation. That's the cap. Our expenditures, on the other hand, are about 70% wages and benefits. And believe me, limiting wages to 1% a year increases is not a viable option. You can understand that those two lines are going to cross in the not too distant future, and our expenditures will be greater than our revenues, which is something that we don't allow. The only way we can do that then is by reducing services. And that becomes a very challenging thing in a growing community. And I think that if local government is to be one of the key factors of that growth in our community, we need to figure out that revenue expenditure issue for ourselves, but I think we also need to figure it out on a statewide level, because ultimately these are part of the engines for economic growth in our state. That's it. Now the next step is to go, each of you have a name tag, just to make sure you know who you are. And on that name tag is a number. And we've got groups 1, 2, 3, 4 around the room. And so if you would go to the group that has your number on it, and the last thing I'd leave you with is remember, let's look for things that need to be done and can be done over the next 12 months. Let's kind of use that as our focus and see what we can come up with at the end of the next couple hours. Thank you all for coming.
I can't even tell you what I'm doing.
Yes, you kind of talked about conversation recently. They will come piece, because what I do now, when they come, they bring their money with them. And they look for people to help them manage it, to give it away, to spend it, to do all sorts of things. And it's been phenomenally successful as new folks have moved in to see what that does in terms of my personal industry. And I think we will see that throughout a lot of other industries as we move forward. I mean, it is success with a capital S.
Indulgence for just a second, because what I heard Mr. Sutton over here say, I think touches on what I was trying to get at when I first raised the question. We've got a pool of potential here that we don't even understand yet the magnitude nor what the wealth creation capability of it is. I mean, Montana for so long has been willing to harvest raw material for literally pennies on a dollar and export it somewhere else where the real money's made. I think the potential here in this area that we're speaking to have those dollars return to Missoula, virtually very little investment other than encouragement. But if we can't get to the point where we see it as a business enterprise as well as a creative outlet, then I think we've missed the boat.
Clayton, when you say if we can't see it, tell me what you think it is.
Well, what I hear here is you saw an opportunity to take a bunch of individual artists who by themselves couldn't make any real money doing businesses, okay, and then by combining it, collaborating, actually raise the revenue potential of everybody that was involved. Well, if you take that exponentially out, to me, I think the potential is almost limitless. And if we've already got, if you will, a reputation, why not capitalize on that?
Brad Robinson can bring it up to date, I think, and a good example of what you're talking about. What he's doing now, he's with a nonprofit, but it's a business, really. It's a business. And what he's doing with the Nature Center is up to date, and I think it's just a tremendous success story. And Russ wanted to get that story out here too.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. Actually, I'd like to go to Ellen
Yeah, we have
first,
two
and then I'll
questions
come back
before
over
that.
here. Well, let me suggest that if those of you who did the white paper, Clayton, I think what you might be talking about is what the paper writers wrote when they were talking about branding and marketing this creative cluster or creative sense. And the branding of it is what creates that identity that you may be talking about. We'll run through that. Ellen, you had your hand up.
I think, and this is not a very wise or historical perspective, but one of the challenges I think that Missoula is going to face is finding the balance that allows the young, new, creative uses to come here and afford to be here. It's such a popular place that it's obvious housing cost of housing is out of whack. And a lot of the vitality that comes to the arts are those dreamers that aren't a James Lee Burke yet. And we've got to find a way, whether it's through artist studios, live work situation, some way that allows those people to be able to live and work here and keep the vitality of this culture new. And I think that's a challenge that Missoula's going to have to come to.
And perfect trains because of you.
Well, that's fine.
You know, this
Jeff,
question,
you're next.
I was going to speak to Brandy. In my job right now, I'm having these meetings in communities all over the state. Missoula is often held up as the example of what's going on. Matter of fact, it's second generational because it's been going on for 20 years in essence. But one of the problems we're having is, and many of you know the problem of the CBD and cultural tourism and all these things, the conversation repeatedly comes up in all these communities is how do you package and market your cultural amenities, your creative sector, so that it's understandable to those who are promoting economic growth.
On a more active basis, so that senator in Massachusetts or whatever, there is consensus to a certain degree. There is collaboration between all these diverse groups and interested in our forest, and communicate that it's working, and if you've got an issue with it, let us know so that we can get your thoughts into it, but on a bigger scale.
Can I just respond to that real quick? Because going back to your question about how much influence do you have being a local community in a federal process, that collaborative process that brings a lot of diverse people together to come up with a common vision holds an incredible amount of weight. As long as it is a diverse group of people that's doing just as you said, it's much easier to influence the final outcome than influence the implementation. Having that broad base of support is important.
In the job I have right now in economic development, we're seeing a lot of collaboration out there, and a lot of groups that normally never work together. They are doing that. There's some great demonstration projects. We're doing a good job with our force, and I think just needs to communicate stronger. If we have any way of doing that through this working group.
And then what does happen when you get that success is you get our local delegation, our Montana delegation, bringing that back to DC, and that becomes very powerful as well.
And, you know, that also sort of gets away from the fight between local versus national, because people who are local also have national interests that come to the table. When I think about who owns Stone, when I think about your boss, when I think about broader connections that all of you have, this takes us away from the it's our place, no, it belongs to everybody kind of argument. So what we have up here so far is that one of the ways that local business could be impacted or affected in a positive way is that there be connections between local businesses, you know, that you buy from each other. You said, so you, maybe they would buy computers from you, but you would also hope that they value the notion of you want these other things in places. You know, you said that we would hope that agencies would provide predictable places for identified areas, and I don't mean geographic areas, but things. And in that way, local business can look in the mirror tomorrow and say, well, it's just about the same as it was here. And in addition to that, Greg, you said that there'd be a formal record of these collaborative comments and that they're forwarded to people who can hear what this conversation is about. Okay. What else? How else might local business be affected in a positive way? Maggie?
At the risk of sounding motherhoodish or anything like that, just practically speaking, public land managers and folks that interface with the businesses could have just information about the public lands and the resources out there and the opportunities that are city, county, federal type of opportunities that are available in your businesses. But then to a greater extent, what we talked about with the Portland forum that Mike Cadis had, that kind of thing, if there's an opportunity for business folks to be further involved as part of that forum. And I'm thinking like if it's a Friday night forum kind of a thing where they get together and talk about all these issues, that's a way to interface face to face. So from the beginning of information at a checkout counter at the local businesses all the way up to business owners being involved in the conversation.
So that some of the shared information could look like recreation opportunities that sporting goods stores have available for people.
Right, but
and it's
branching out into
connected to the
others.
city's distribution of in-town kinds of things. But, okay, great.
But businesses that are competing on the national level for skilled employees, whatever type of employees,
number of resources to workers, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of turning that thought around that we aren't the unemployment office. We have a tremendous number of services to help people find jobs, help them sell themselves and find jobs. So that's been an ongoing.
Does it also include helping them to make this retraining choice or know, way, well, should I go get radiology or should I go get lawn and garden,
Some of the employment consultants do that. And that's still in process too. You've got people who've been there for 30 years aren't quite into that. And then some of the newer folks, they are doing that.
Well, I feel like you guys are at the center of this in a lot of ways because both businesses and workers go to you when they're in a fix. And that you almost refer out to resources like Paul and Jim and specific kinds of training programs. But if there were a hub, it seems to me like it is kind of the job service that's a natural one. And I think it is interesting to focus some energy there to say, well, let's not start something else over here. But I'm not from inside the system, so I can be talking about my attitude. But so the interesting thing to me would be, right now, are you what's the demographic of who you're serving? Would we have a goal of saying, of getting it to be, are you serving mostly people in a certain income bracket? Or do we have a goal of saying, let's get the word on job service and all their referrals and networks to the next notch up in our kind of demographic?
I think that would help because we do have a lot of people coming there who are, the typical person who used to come into the job service. We've got higher and higher level of people. The jobs that we post are management, the people who still have the lower wage jobs.
Well, if I'm looking for a management job, I don't think I'm coming in at this point. But that may be just something I don't know.
No. There are some, but not a lot. And then some of those employers are the ones that use the job service as a courtesy, and they usually hire outside as some of our referrals, and that's kind of frustrating.
I think that's an important question to pose is, does this group want to work with a specific, in this next 12 months? Are you looking at a certain salary, are you looking at a blue collar worker, the white collar worker, or are you looking at working with the businesses, the employees? It seems like at this point you probably should narrow down who your focus group is.
Well, I think we should narrow down what's in the next 12 months is what's an opportunity that's waiting to be grabbed. You guys are on the edge of something. It's up to you to say, one thing we can do in the next 12 months, and it doesn't have to be a comprehensive goal. I think we should work on what's out there that fits in with customization, agility, and coordination. What are some opportunities sitting there? Because all these goals are intertwined. We want higher wages, we want a ladder, we want all that. So what's sitting out there? We had just a little more oomph.
Well, what Jim was talking about with the healthcare professions, moving them into the high schools, and we're trying to make that as seamless. That's out there. The carpenter program's out there. One thing I was thinking about, what you were talking about, is maybe we need to be offering some coaching to persons that are at the $7 level and mentoring or insight or whatever, saying, okay, here's your skills, here's your interests, here's how we can help you get to that $10 level. Because they get caught in a bad circle where they don't have time to do anything, they can't get more money to do anything, it just keeps circling the wrong way. So I think we need to help coach those people forward into some other areas.
Do all community have job coaches, mentoring? I mean, is there like retired quarter of senior retired executives?
We have 17 different entities that have some kind of involvement with client worker placement, training, whether it's, they all are directed towards specific characteristics. And single women with children, there's 17 agencies in the UR that have some level of client work, whether it's the Y. There's a wide variety of people working with adults.
trying to find training opportunities and better employment for specific categories of clients.
Well, I go back to what Anderson said. If I had a specific $7 person who over coffee one day would say, you know, I just can't get out of this grind in Missoula. I'm making $7 an hour, I got an education, I can't get ahead, blah, 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 and I don't know how to get out of this. Okay? I'd like to be able to say, gee,
No, two of them give a real bad name to bicyclists when they cross 3 lanes of traffic and they don't follow the rules and that kind of thing. But we are, pretty friendly bike town. Alternative.
Talk about infrastructure for the people, the residents, and infrastructure for the government itself too, like, basically, probably a new public safety building, that's infrastructure. But it's not very sexy to sell to people.
And that's probably going to be long-term, or longer-term, they want to get it.
Not that we want a sexy police facility, but.
Or those mating opportunities.
That's why you have Harleys on the police force.
Janet, I don't know if it's ended up on the list here anyway in a specific form, but I'm wondering about just sort of the general notion of districting. We have a Flushing district downtown. There's not a soul who shows up to talk about their assessment in their Flushing district, for example. So street sweeping gets done and then gets paid by this district. Are there other opportunities, especially in places where infrastructure is in place, where we could create some of these districts that are paid for almost directly by the users, maybe free up some money to.
That's something that Great Falls does. Just a question for me. And when you think about the whole River Road community, and they're between Russell and Reserve and Third and the river, that they're one of their big frustrations has been that there's no real infrastructure in place to absorb and mitigate the development, and that they want trails and parks and sidewalks and that kind of stuff. What's the term for when you tell that district, you guys can create a district, tax yourself, create that infrastructure? Is that?
Well, there's sort of two ways. I mean, that property is already in a taxing district.
Part of it is. Yeah.
Part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly,
And
what's
neighborhoods
going
are
on with the
organized
city
itself?
right now, they can create a special improvement district and put in a neighborhood park, put in a trail, and it gets assessed against their property.
So one idea would be for the city to facilitate communities' desire to do that. So it's like with all these constraints that we have, we're not able to do this thing, and we're seeing how that's, you're losing property values, or you're frustrated about it yourself, right? Yeah, but there is a way for you to do that yourself, and we can help facilitate that process for you to do that to yourself.
When I brought that subject up with those people, the response has been very not much. We'd like the money to come from somewhere else to provide us with infrastructure.
Right.
But ultimately, do they realize that it's going to come back to them? They see it directly when they're trying to petition for SID as homeowners, and it's going to get tacked on. But ultimately, are they recognizing that if they go and seek the money elsewhere, that it's coming from them?
They think they have no choice. If you can choose, you're going to choose for someone else to pay for it. But if they realize
Yeah, I guess
that's not
offset.
going to happen, then they might be willing to pay.
Along that line,
that thought down.
Well, it would be that there is the ability, it's a
Special assessment
special assessment districts that, a community could self-organize itself around creating itself that and then taxing itself to do the improvements that they want. And so if the city could facilitate that process for a neighborhood so that the neighborhood could actually kind of get some assistance in figuring out what that means and how it pans out, and the neighborhood's responsible for organizing itself to pursue the methodology, but that methodology is accessible to people to pursue, would be one way to, facilitate infrastructure
I mean, I'm just thinking about my neighborhood, there's not a lot of sidewalks, and sometimes I sort of dream about door knocking my neighborhood and getting everybody to agree to spend $25,000 so they can have a little spit of sidewalk so the kids are safer. You know, so just kind of, I wouldn't even know how to start that process though.
Just following up on that in terms of potential legislative change. Most of the grant programs through the state, the CDBG and the Treasure State Endowment, almost go exclusively to water and sewer and not other kinds of public improvements. And it seems to me that there are really a lot of programs at the state level, the SRF and others for water and sewer, but very little assistance for other infrastructure programs. And that seems like that would fit in nicely. The neighborhood could get a Treasure State Endowment grant to 25% of the cost or something like that.
Okay, now what I need you to do is look at these and pick 1 to 3 that we can focus on in the next 12 months. 1 to 3.
Prioritize.
Yeah, let's prioritize them.
That sounds hard and I don't want to do it.
I'm sorry, I'll do it for you.
Should we send it to
Oh, let's send this back to computer.
Easy, yeah.
Put on your list 22.
Just leave it to Nick. Just leave it to our presenter.
There you go.
So they made that decision to save the preserve.
Well, could one, and how fair is it to lump it all together? I mean, because one overriding thing up there would be pursuing legislative change that would allow local governments more ability to fund infrastructure. And that covers 7 or 8 of those categories.
If you just put the word equitably fund infrastructure
Yeah.
in a way that promotes good planning, that capsule, that kind of summarizes the whole discussion. Infrastructure.
From my wanderings around, it looked like good discussions were going on at all 4 groups. The group over in the corner had to leave because the art folks were so boisterous. What we're gonna, I really appreciate how much conversation that was going on in the break, and I always hate to break that up because I know there's a lot of good stuff happening there. I want you to note in the schedule that we did kind of leave, that's what networking is called, or that's what we're describing as networking. So when we get done with kind of all the regular business, there will still be more cookies and opportunities for conversation afterwards. I want to encourage you to use those. And I have the sense that it's not working entirely well, but. Okay.
Take it off.
Well, I think, take it off.
No.
You want to be careful what you ask for. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll ask each group to make a presentation. We'll go in the order, and then we'll take a minute for any clarifying questions. And when we get all 4 groups done, then we're going to try to see, well, what do we have in common among the 4 groups? Where are the crossover things? Are there any real major places we need to focus? What's kind of boiling to the top here? Sound okay? So, Linda Moss, we're going to have someone from Billings present the first group.
Okay, can you hear me? Well, I am representing the creative cluster concept in Missoula, and it's great to be here. And someone from Missoula will have to go to Billings June 23rd to do this role when we have our Montana on the Move forum. We had a lively discussion, and I think Sue Talbot's comment about see us dream sounds to me that that's what a lot of folks are doing in the Missoula community. We talked about America is a searching country, and people come to the West because they have big dreams, and they've been doing that for centuries. It's a place where we have arts, creative culture, public art, literature, dance, theater, and many of the studies in this part of the country are showing that the creative capital is something that can really bring people to communities. It's a recruiting tool, and it's a major part of economic development in the West. So we came up with, I think, 4 areas that the folks in Missoula will focus on in the next 12 months. And the sort of our main umbrella is improving the quality of the community, really thinking about Missoula and how the creative culture can connect with the business culture and really build the Missoula community. The idea of the city club seemed to resonate with the group, and it's a priority. We have about, it looks like 5 people who are going to shepherd that concept through in the next 12 months. I think, Russ, we appointed you as temporary chair. Do you have anything to add to the concept of a creative cluster? I don't know, see where you're at.
We'll just be getting together.
Okay, all right, they're getting together. Okay. The second one is sort of define and conduct an inventory of cultural assets in the community, thinking that there may be an opportunity collectively to do some branding, to really do some very focused marketing. And we have 4 individuals there. David Nelson, we kind of appointed you as temporary chair. Where are you at? Anything to add? Meeting, right? You're going to meeting. Yes. The third one is develop a creative incubator. We actually had a lot of discussion of how the business community and the creative community can intersect and build bridges to connect in Missoula. And this concept of a creative incubator, whether it would be an incubator for artists to come together to develop marketing skills, where business people could gather to learn from the creative folks in the community. There are lots of opportunities. There are certainly many models throughout the United States. And Ellen is the appointed temporary chair of that committee. Ellen, where are you? Do you have anything to add?
You didn't tell me.
Oh, since I'm from Billings, I could appoint you. Anything to add? As a newcomer. Okay, all right. So another overarching theme for all of these concepts are sort of stabilizers, or how do you always be mindful and remember the successes that you've had in your community. And a lot of the discussion was, how can we celebrate the creative energy in the Missoula community? So we talked about transforming the downtown, tying into the gallery walks, and actually creating a community celebration of arts in Missoula. We also talked about the role of education, K through 12, and how the arts in education are very important as learning skills, as skills that people can use throughout their lives as they enter the business world and interact with their community. We have an appointed chair of that of Catherine. Catherine, are you here? Any comments? Guess not. So that's the report from the creative clusters in Missoula, and we're all around if you have any questions, but thanks. And thanks to all of the folks that participated.
Great, thanks, Linda. Bob, you want to take off on the second group?
Okay, thank you. And we are the group that discuss natural resources and how natural resources are a part of the community we have here and the potential for our community in the future. We had some time that we had resisted temptation to help Debbie rewrite and revise the rural forest plan, but once we got beyond that, we did discuss a lot about the interaction between our community and the opportunities and the demands that we have upon the natural resource base that we have around Missoula and in western Montana, and sometimes the conflicts that are created by the various interests and demands for the utilization of that resource. And we talked a large time about how and where that interaction comes between the resources. This thing kind of cuts in.
Leave it out.
You're sounding just like I did.
It's a good system when it works. Okay, well, hopefully my voice will carry far enough to the back of the room, the sides of the room. But out of that process, we did develop 3 areas or action items that we felt would be appropriate and valuable to pursue in the next 12 months in relationship to our natural resources and how they may be utilized and the impact that they can and should have upon our development of our community and the opportunities we have in our community in the coming times. The first one was to try a collaborative model or forum to address and plan to control or manage the fire threat and risk to both the urban area and the interface area. And as we all experienced last summer, this is certainly an issue that's near and dear to almost everybody in the Missoula area, and the impact that fires can have, the impact both in terms of economic and in terms of just the ability to weather the storm, so to say, and live through all the smoke that comes from the forest fires, especially when they're close. So one of the first action steps was to address that through that process. A second item was to get city, county, school, state, federal planners all together in one room at one time to link and shape a vision supporting the connection between the larger Missoula community and natural resources. And that was kind of the general gist of our discussion within our group and the mission of our group to discuss. And this particular item is on the list because we have a number of different entities that are a part of the process that decides how these resources can and should be used, how to do have interaction and dialogue with members of the community, members of different interest groups, and sometimes that effort becomes fragmented and sometimes it becomes disjointed because these different groups that then eventually have a responsibility to move forward with some kind of action or plan are not necessarily following the same path because they are working together. So our objective in this item was to get those groups all together, at least in a forum where they can shape and discuss that vision as a group rather than as individual entities. The third item was together and with others who want to be involved, that we would have a forum, that we would be a forum or a sounding board for the forest supervisors for the Lolo Forest Plan revision. So as a group, whether it be the group that is sitting here today or a larger group, to be available as a sounding board to that process, that revision process. We did agree that we would all gather up one more time as a group before July and discuss these items some more. We did have volunteers to shepherd these different action items. One is Greg Lind, Greg was over there, and Debbie Austin, who was our leader to begin with, and Donna Cockler. And Donna was here somewhere. Donna. So those are our 3 shepherds that are going to help gather our thoughts and move forward on these items. So that's the report of Team 2.
Any clarifying questions? You're right, man. Now, any clarifying questions? And you'll get applause too if it's a good question. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, it works. First of all, the workforce development team took a very serious approach to this whole subject, contrary to the creative arts team. Way too much less. After all, we're talking about jobs. We had a lot of discussion about creating opportunity or finding and facilitating opportunity for people within the community who want to earn a better income, and finding ways to access that, and also to organize ourselves better. There's a lot of workforce training resources in the community already, and if you have the ability or the time, for example, to enroll in the College of Technology, in a certification program, take the 2-year certification in engine repair, for example, you can probably get a decent job in Missoula. So the focus of our discussion was a little bit of people who are, you might call them the working poor, who don't have quite that ability. How do we help some of those people get into training programs to access that opportunity? So we thought about ways to build on this, on the good things that are going on, and try to make them a little more efficient or a little more effective. We talked about a first call program where anybody that's interested in Missoula, in jobs and bettering themselves, would have one place to go to get some basic information and pointed in the right direction. There's a lot of organizations in town, for example, that reach out to specific people and specific client characteristics, but they don't necessarily work together or coordinate. And having a first call center, and we talked about the job service being probably the best place to do that with a lot of partners. Many of us remember, and I can say this because Barb Kennedy from the job service said it first, many of us used to call the job service the unemployment office. And we'd like to be known, like the job service to be known as the employment office. And the other thing that we discussed is with a first call center where we're communicating on issues. If our organization, for example, is working with a company and the people at the job service are placing people there and they're having a difficulty with turnover, it could be because that company needs to maybe provide a better employment package. So the job service needs to feel comfortable in communicating that to the company and to us and to others, and perhaps we can make a positive change in that way. So organizing ourselves in that way, partners and contacts, bringing together databases, a profile of our workforce, and I'll get to that one in a minute. And then we talked about how you get started in perhaps with the biggest industry. And the healthcare has created in Missoula 5,200 jobs since 1990. So someone who wants to find a better, wants to improve their household income, healthcare is a great place to look because a lot of healthcare jobs are fairly easy to access at the bottom rung of the ladder. So how do you work your way up the ladder with training? What help do you need to get a LPN job, for example? So again, having this coordinated and work together, we thought would be a good first effort. Secondly, where's our workforce need going to be in 10 years? So we wanted to market what's happening in Missoula, market it to ourselves. And where do we see job opportunity occurring? And with our economy, this sounds like a no-brainer, it's real easy, but I've talked to many people looking for jobs in Missoula, and they say, where do I go? And I start to list some companies that I'm aware of, and these people, some of whom are from Missoula, say, I had no idea they were here. So there's a lot of dynamic activity in the economy, but it's smaller level companies that will talk to people who have the gumption to go talk to them. So what does that mean for workforce is that our workforce needs are changing. And can we get a better picture of that and then adapt that? And then I think our strength, of course, is healthcare education. Finally, this whole area of customized training, of responding to an opportunity in the private sector with an employer, then to customize training, and then reaching out to the various entities that have contact with people who want to get in a training program so that they get enrolled and they get a better job. So whether it's customized training for new jobs or customized training for existing employment, but being responsive and streamlined to meet the needs of the employer. We've talked a lot about that. There's a lot of good things going on. Can we organize it better? And I think we had a lot of discussion. There's some work being done on this by 4 organizations right now. It's the Chamber and the Job Service and the Montana Community Development Corporation and our organization. So we're going to take a stab at coming up with some proposals here. And then we've got, I don't know, Jim, did we promise to meet again?
We didn't, but we could.
Okay. And I think we probably need to get together as our group one more time to crystallize these a little bit, to get a little more meat on the bones.
Who are your leaders that volunteer?
Who are our leaders?
Leaders.
Leaders.
Shepherds.
Shepherds. Wolfgang has volunteered. He's not here today. But and I'm going to get Barb in trouble, I know. But we talked a lot about the job service as being a key organization. It's a state agency that's locally based, and by interfacing with the job service, we can make better use of that resource, and a lot of partners can make that work better. With Rosalie at MCDC, myself at MAADC, and Kim at the Chamber, Jim at the public schools, and Paul. I think, and then anybody else who would, that's kind of our core, and we're open to anyone else as well. But we have been meeting, we've met several times informally and discussed a lot of this, so we're not starting from scratch, but we do need, if an employer in Missoula needs to have, is concerned about being able to fill a good job, where can they go to say, develop a training program? And Paul did a lot of good work on this last year, even put a brochure out, drafted. So I think we're real close to some achievable things here within the next 12 months.
Yeah, but hydrogen for the future is not my idea of a brochure for this.
It isn't. I didn't even get on that.
Oh, how'd you miss that opportunity?
Any other questions, clarifications?
Where do we find our budget items for our various task orders?
We all have pockets.
And just let me, on the final note, let me assure Doug that hydrogen is not hot air.
I think David does raise a legitimate issue. I mean, we're asking you to do things and to try to move agendas forward, and sometimes that costs money, and we haven't, think about how we're going to do that, because I mean, part of the mayor's office and some of the other offices put out a fair amount of money to do the first forum. You'll notice this forum you had to pay for your own lunch, unlike the first one. It's kind of like get them to nibble on the hook and then set it. But I mean, it's not something that I think we can fund out of city government or county government. There are some grant sources that are available for certain parts of what we're doing, but being able to sustain these types of things often takes some little bit of resource, if not a lot. And so please kind of have that in your thought process as we kind of go through the discussions. Okay, thank you, Dick.
Nick doesn't need that.
I can do that.
Mr. Coughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Community Foundation Group bit off an awful lot here because infrastructure is sort of the basis of the community. There's social infrastructure and there's physical infrastructure, and we're talking about the physical infrastructure, the streets, roads, sewer, and water. And, oh, by the way, I wasn't here for the first forum and didn't get my free lunch, so you owe me.
I think you've got a few others.
I generally like to have the last word, but I'll respect it. So the first item we talked about really was how to fund infrastructure, because local government is supported by the property tax. The property tax is a very regressive tax, and if you are on a fixed income and your property goes up in value, you pay more taxes. Whereas the income tax is a much fairer tax. The more money you make, the more taxes you pay, but that's how state government is funded. And so when we talk about infrastructure and extending infrastructure, and why is that important? Because that's where growth is going to occur. Believe it or not, we can't control growth. We can just control where growth goes and how it goes in our community, and infrastructure is a big part of that. And so looking at funding and the importance of infrastructure, the first thing we talked about was pursue legislative change to equitably fund infrastructure that promotes an acceptable pattern of growth okay? And we, quite honestly, need more tools. We need more financing tools and better ability to control our own destiny through being able to finance infrastructure and determine how our community is going to grow than what we currently have. It's going to be very hard to do because, as Mike Cadis talked about at the start of the session, is an awful big part of the state is eastern Montana that isn't experiencing the same problems that we're experiencing here. People just don't want their property taxes to go up. So we thought of a lot of great ideas with Larry Swanson and Maynard Ellingson in the group in terms of innovative ways to perhaps pursue and finance infrastructure and the use of infrastructure as a tool to control the pattern of growth in the community. The focus of discussion regarding infill development in this community has focused on what we call planned neighborhood clusters. What happens in Kevin's neighborhood, you see, if someone wants to put a house in his backyard, see, the proximity of that extra house, you see how we reacted, I didn't like that. And most people know. I guess it was in your front yard. So. But we have two, we have two, to stay on task. Okay, we have an example of infill development, which is PNCs, which is really good because it's a symptom. There's a symptom that people in the community have identified that, by gosh, we're experiencing growth and it affects us all, okay? We have two great tax increment districts, thanks Jeff Badnock, to work within the community to create a new model for infill development. Infrastructure is there already, to show the community how we can infill with larger pieces of property and not just on individual lots in existing neighborhoods. So we need to look to those new tax increment districts to talk about infill and how this community is going to grow. We have a fixed amount of land in which we can grow because of our mountains, because of our physical setting. If we use that land poorly by not extending infrastructure, we're going to be out of land. We will sprawl ourselves right out of land, and we will still have growth issues. So the second one was use the new tax increment districts to create a new model for infill, to refocus the discussion a bit, all right, including mixed use. The third area in terms of infrastructure was to engage in a conversation about growth. Everybody who lives in this community moved here, or created a family here, or a household split up one way or the other. Everybody in this room is responsible for some growth in this community, every single one of us. It's not just people moving here. I think Dick in his discussion talked about 5,200 new medical jobs. Well, Larry, that's because of you. All right? So you've got some responsibility here, all right? So if the community can understand, that we all have some responsibility for the growth that's happening in this community, we can all maybe get together and start talking about it as a community. And then look at those funding solutions that will allow all of us to participate, right, in determining a way through the use of infrastructure to grab hold of our own future and growth in the community. We had some outcomes, okay? One, inside the community, try to increase the level of tension. Okay, we're going to grow. Do we need to be anxious about it? We need to be a little anxious about it, but instead of fighting with each other on one level, take that energy and channel it into a broader discussion of growth in the community. Identify where the next 10,000 houses will be built, because there's going to be 10,000 houses that come here. It's up to us, it's our responsibility to figure out where those 10,000 homes are going to go. And infrastructure is a big part of that. And Bruce Bugby and our group said, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't extend infrastructure. Maybe that forces the discussion that if we're going to grow here. We're going to grow right here. We're going to grow up, right? We're going to do infill. The financing, the kit we need, the tools we need, right, to finance and develop a good infrastructure plan are not available to us. Seriously, they're not available to us. We were a little sheepish about defining shepherds. But we flocked from this room to that room to another room because we got moved. Okay? And so we felt that for this discussion to continue, it needed to be community-based. We appreciate Janet and Mike and their facilitation efforts, but this needs to come from the community. There's the potential for the idea that was brought up at the start of the meeting for that city club and a separate committee on infrastructure under that city club. develop working groups to move our actions forward and have another focused group so we can work on these actions. So if you have any questions about the work of the Community Foundation's task force, I'll be happy to try to answer those.
Questions for Nick or that group? Challenges, objections? Okay. Thank you, Nick.
One of the challenges is funding, and there's an old entity that has finally started to come to maturity. It's called the Inland Northwest Economic Adjustment Strategy. They're going to be entering legislation in the federal Senate, Senator Baucus and Senator Crapo, I think, within the next few weeks, which is supposedly going to try and get a big chunk of money for economic development, infrastructure, and things like that. One of the biggest problems that's been with other regional developments is they get the money and then they don't know where to put it. So if anything, I might suggest that maybe getting our name in there and our ideas in there as early as possible might put us a little bit ahead of the queue.
Thank you, Russ. David?
Are there any simulators that exist? In other words, we're always talking about if you do this, this happens, if you do that, this happens. Are there any model simulators where the average citizen can say, oh, I don't want you in my backyard, and you say, okay, this is what happens then in other backyards?
You know, the mayor has worked hard, David, over the last couple of years to develop a game, and the valley is the game board, and the little squares are 40 acres and 1 home per acre, and you look at how many homes you need in the next 20 years, and you try to figure out where to put that. And that's a great game. I wish everybody in Missoula would play it so they'd understand that it is a finite valley, and we do have some issues. The other thing we talked about in our group was maybe there's a model in the Rocky Mountain West for other communities that have experienced growth, and we can look at it. Of course, that's a resource that the city has already. They've looked at that. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We certainly want to look and see what was there and appreciate Russ's comment.
The other thing along that line, David, is the city and the county are both obligated to update our growth policy, and we need to start that over the course of the next year. And we have looked at some technology models. One is called Community Viz, I think, and it essentially allows you to incorporate a number of variables, and as you start trying to put population in places, then it'll if you get it calibrated right, it'll tell you, well, you got a transportation problem over here, and it'll only take you $5 million to solve that. And so, or you got a sewer problem over here, or you have a service problem over here. So it's an interactive kind of a tool, and we've talked a little bit about trying to incorporate something like that in that process, but you know, it costs money, and I think we need to look at some other communities and see if they've been able to successfully do it. I mean, getting the community that involved in that level of detail in neighborhood planning may be a little too much, but you know, that's one of those tools that's out there. And one of the opportunities that exists for us over the course of the next year or so is that, you know, this is something we have to do. So let's take advantage of that and try to create broader discussion around that opportunity. Other questions, comments? Okay, what we'd like to try to do now is we've got a number of ideas and kind of directions up here. I wonder if you could help us try to tie those together. I mean, do you see common themes that are kind of coming through on those? Do you see where there are synergies? Doing one thing helps doing another thing? Those types of questions. Do you see where there's obvious flaws? I mean, that it just isn't going to work, Cadis? That kind of stuff. I figured the last one would get some.
Mike, just to help you get started, you can see the city club idea has come out of 2 groups.
Let me just ask, are any of you familiar with city clubs in other communities that you've lived in, and do you have any experience with them?
I have some questions about them. I mean, how do you join? Are you invited? Is it exclusive? Is it inclusive? What size is it? Who pays for it? Other than that, I don't have any questions.
Traditionally, as well as I know, they are all kind of, everybody's involved. Well, and I know the Portland one made a big deal of allowing women to participate in 1973. But you know, they kind of figured it out eventually. And it's membership driven. There are dues, and I'm sure they're private nonprofits, so they're able to go out and get some grants and things like that as well for special projects. But it's not something that's funded through the government. It's totally independent, and probably turns out to be one of the government's biggest critics.
I have gone to the Portland ones, and it's Friday at lunch. It's in a sort of a big, like a hotel. And the one I went to was a pretty popular topic. I don't remember what it was years ago, but there were about 150 people in the room, and anyone could come and you would purchase your lunch. And I'm assuming that members got some sort of a rebate on their lunch. And it was something that was very much backed by the business community. So, the chamber would be an obvious, and downtown association would be obvious players we want to get involved. And it was sort of like a hip place to go. You wanted to go and see who was there and intermingle, and it was like a snazzy scene going on. So, which I think we could recreate.
Just a minute. Sounds like a country club.
But some of that, there was a Tony element, but it's a bigger city, but you just had a sense of sort of being in the room with lots of people who are moving pieces in the community and are interesting to talk to.
Well, I think it's exactly the kind of thing that was happening in this room before we started this part of the session. I mean, I'd make about 3 rounds to get you all to sit down and shut up. And that's really good. I mean, that's great, and that's happening. We didn't even have alcohol involved. And so creating opportunities like for that to happen is a really positive thing. I mean, that's a good tool. Paul?
It's not a hip place, but I would volunteer the COT and my culinary staff to support that.
They're good cooks.
One of the great things about having these is that what you can do is, yes, the COT, but you can move them around the city, have them in different locales. And what that does is it gives other people the opportunity to show off their building, their museum, whatever it may be, and it makes them feel more involved as it comes to their location, et cetera. And a lot of times those companies will provide some degree of support. The other critical thing that has to be there, though, is an incredible support from the press. Because what you want to do is make sure that anybody and everybody can find out about this so they can participate. So it doesn't become this little closed group that, we meet every Friday and, go ahead and try and find us. Those are some of the things. But, in other communities, it becomes just a way of life. You figure that at least a day a week, you're going to be out networking, talking to people, working with the relationships that you need to build. And I think, yes, you're right. It could easily be done here.
So why don't we just stay on this subject for a little bit? Are there those in other groups that see ways to interconnect kind of what they were talking about with the notion of a city club? And are there kind of parts of it that you'd be interested in participating with Russ's group that help move this forward? Rosalie?
Well, I like the idea of the city club, and one thing that I think was clunky today, and I can criticize this since I helped make it happen, was, it was clunky trying to do an action plan. We're kind of not really empowered to do it, to tell you the truth, and I think that was some of the reticence to take on shepherding and stuff. We're not, that just was a clunky thing to do in this setting. But I like the idea of the city club as a place where we can hash ideas out. It doesn't, I don't know where the part comes where we create a community vision and do that work, but, and maybe we don't need to, but I like the idea of it as a place where we just hash it out and talk to each other, and especially get different people talking to each other. So,
I guess I'd like to add to that. I agree that there's a lot of opportunity to use the city club for a forum for that. I think that the two groups, the one on natural resources and the one on infrastructure, have a lot in common. A lot about growth and where it happens and how it happens, and I think that the city club kind of forum could be really beneficial to start talking
Don't you think there's a natural tie too, though, between jobs
Oh, yeah.
and growth and infrastructure? And so if healthcare is really going to continue to grow, it is, because we're going to continue to age, people are, it's not just a conversion of, I was a gas station attendant one day, then I'm in the healthcare business the next. People are going to move, and it's going to be an attractant. So there's absolutely a connection between these three. And then why would we want to live here if there wasn't a connection between the arts and all the options?
I think the other thing that's consistent with our discussion in the city club is that we would form committees and work groups on special areas within the city club or construct.
It's certainly in Portland, that's a big part of what they do. I don't know about other groups, but interestingly, one of the staffers for the Portland City Club grew up in Drummond, and he offered to come visit with me sometime about it, so I'll take him up on that.
Mike, is there any other cities besides Portland that had this idea?
Cleveland has had it for a long time, and those are the two I'm most familiar with. I'm not really aware of many others, but I happen to believe there are a bunch of others.
There's no sense reinventing the wheel if they've got it.
Seattle?
Seattle?
Yeah. Minneapolis. Yeah.
The thing I like about the concept of the city club is, I think in this town, the naysayers have really had such a strong voice in this community and have turned growth into such an ugly thing, that it kind of gives this group of people a voice. So I think you really need a commitment from people who want to move this forward to attend and be vocal and be there. No whining. Whining's okay, but it has to be positive.
Well, let me ask you. Speaking of whining, any downsides here? I mean, I can think of a couple. I'd be a little concerned about how some of the service clubs would feel about it as kind of competition for that lunch crowd, the Kiwanis, Rotary. And I think that's, in a way, almost a political issue that kind of needs to be dealt with up front, so that what gets created is not a threat to what it is they're doing.
Right, and even if you did it as a breakfast, I would see a downside would be how many people are coming this month because of topic, or this week because the topic's decided. So how would the facility that's providing the food decide whether they had to have enough food available for 20 of us to buy or 100 to buy? So.
One thing, the way Portland does it is they have a reservation system.
Okay.
And I think you have to call in or email in by Wednesday or Thursday, and kind of commit. The lunch is like, it's a pretty expensive lunch. I hope it's good. 16 or 18 bucks if you're a member. Maybe 16 if you're a member and 18 if you're not. And so if you want to reserve lunch, you've got to call in and do that. And there's probably some leeway if you just show up. Then if you want to come for just cookies and coffee, you can do that for like $5. And I don't think you have to make a reservation for that. Or if you want to just come, it's open to city club members for free, and I think maybe other people have to pay $5 to just show up, just to help with the cost of the room. So there's a kind of a scale there, depending on how much time you're going to, how much you're going to eat, basically, which is always a good basis for charging.
I don't like that.
As I said,
Is the city club a private entity, Mike, or is it a government-sponsored entity?
Private
not-for-profit. Private not-for-profit.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, and speaking of the working poor, could there be provisions made for directors of nonprofit organizations?
We can always make provisions for directors of nonprofit organizations. The question is, what will they be? Russ?
And from just an organizational standpoint, we mentioned lunches, we mentioned breakfasts. As we saw with this little gathering prior to us reconvening here,
One of the problems you have if you have it during the workday is that people get very frustrated because they have to stop and go back to work. Some of the better ones that I've been to have been on Friday afternoons, so that you can continue with that really crucial networking, that you know, I got together I need to talk to these 3 people further on. So just a thought, it's usually a lot easier to make them very successful.
You have to be really careful with Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts on that? How about some of, Henry?
Almost every group talked about the need to have constructive conversations or communications, and we've been focusing on, right now the City Club is maybe a way to do that. Are there other ways to do that other than the creation of the City Club?
We've got a forest plan that's in process. We're going to have a growth policy that's in process.
Right, I mean, we were talking in the infrastructure about, you know, the merits and the demerits of the Vision 2020 process in the 90s as a way to bring new players into the debate about how we grow and what we grow. And we didn't come to a resolution of what that process would actually look like, but we are also acknowledging that we need to, our work group will continue to try to figure out how to create, and it'd be great if people have ideas here of how to create some sort of a process where we can get folks to be more, you know, productive and creative and supportive of one another as we try to answer these tough questions in the community.
So what I've heard then is processes like Vision 2020, processes like traditional government structure processes, growth management, and forest plan. And then thinking about others, which seems like a good idea. Let me come back and talk about, or ask the question about affordability here. I'm not clear on how accessible something like the City Club can be to people who can't afford $16 a meal. Is that model really accessible, or does it kind of become a private club, I guess would be my question. And is that what we want to create in our capacity to have these conversations?
And I think one of the concerns that was expressed in the infrastructure group was that it can't be government, it cannot be a government-driven conversation. It has to come from the community. So, I mean, that doesn't really address your question, although I think what I heard Mike say was that people could come and listen and not pay for lunch for the City Club idea. But I think another idea or another issue is that it can't be government driven, or at least that was the perception of some.
Well, the other idea would be to not have it based around a meal. To have people always come better if they have food.
Well, I think that's an interesting issue. I mean, how important is having a meal? I mean, it does help anchor things, so to speak.
If you don't have a meal, it's just another meeting. And there's just so many meetings.
I think we should look at the experience of other communities and then go forward.
John?
Well, I was just thinking, one of the difficulties we have, I think Barb touched on it, is I think we provide lots of opportunities for people to vent without any accountability. And I think if it costs you $5 or $2.50 or $10, there starts to be a little bit of a, I mean, there's a little money where your mouth is. You have to be a little more serious about it. And I'd be more than willing to offer scholarships to folks, you know, who, if you're a serious person, but you can't make it work, I think we could figure out a way to make that work.
You personally, John, or the city council?
You know, I'll take at least 2.
If the City Club is to have a speaker that's put forth an idea or putting forth an idea, isn't that the role of our civic clubs like Kiwanis and Rotary, or is it a place for discussion? Are we going to have our discussions and then bring it to the City Club and have our ideas put forward to a general population? Or what is the exact audience that we're trying to reach? Are we going to be, you know, duplicating a system that's already in place?
But I think from the way I understand them, the audience is people who are particularly interested in that community dialogue. And so you try to find speakers who will focus on and have expertise in issues that pertain to the community, and which is a huge realm, but that the real audience is people a lot like the folks you all. I mean, that's kind of, to a certain extent, how you got invited here. I mean, we knew that you're kind of interested in the community. So I think, there's the potential for some overlap with groups like Kiwanis and Rotary and Service Club. But there's a different objective as well. I mean, it's not necessarily a service club. Janet, and
I've belonged to a service club since 1979, and a service club to me is not focused on this kind of stuff. Yes, they may have speakers that come in and talk to them about community-oriented things, but a service club, what is the Lions Club's focus? Eyes. Okay. What is Rotary's?
Fees and scholarships.
Okay. So, see, while they might be interconnected, I really don't see them as the same thing that we're trying to focus on here. It's not been my experience.
This is Rosalie's predictable comment that I hope that we're also cognizant that we operate in a region and that we think about this as we develop it, that we have, there's no black and white border between Missoula and not Missoula. And so I hope that we can just incorporate some concept of the region we operate in as well. I appreciate that there's particular urban concerns and leadership, but I think there's a regional piece too.
we definitely aren't seeing the forest for the trees if we think that all we are is the city. Well, so Dick says that so is the city-county club. I would argue against that. I think call it the city club because really the city is the hub. And one of the problems that we have in Montana is that we don't have an appreciation for how important cities are. Not that they're the end-all and the be-all, but we like to deny their importance and even their existence in some cases. And part of what I think we need to do is change that viewpoint on a regional basis so that we can begin to get some appreciation for the regional nature of cities, not just the kind of the fact that it's this a thing with boundaries around it. Okay.
One other thing that, the city club is, to me, is going to end up being exclusive to some degree. I think it would be different from service club, but it's still going to be exclusive because of the nature of the meeting and discussion of topics. There are going to be leaders in the community in general that are going to be participating in that. And one of the questions that Anne Mary asked a while back here is, what are some other forums? One of the things that we discussed a little bit in our group is that this group is here because of invitation. One of the things you talked about is the percentage of working poor in our community and who's representing them in these discussions. And when we talk about other discussion forums, how do we provide an opportunity, a meaningful opportunity, for those people who are not part of, whether you want to call it the leadership groups in the community, whether it be business, government, service, whatever leadership groups we have. How do we provide a forum in this process to provide dialogue and discussion with that part of our community? And it's not going to be in the city club. Any
You
thoughts?
certainly have groups like, Jim Morton's group and other groups be members of the city club and even maybe provide scholarships for their membership. I mean, some of the some of the nonprofits that do represent the low to moderate income people, we have lots of those. Maybe not enough, but they definitely could participate.
Well, a fair question is, would you want the city club to be just driven by whoever wants to attend? Or would you want to try to recruit? Would you want to kind of forcefully cast a broader net?
I'd love to see an opportunity for other ways of creating discussions within the community. If this is a community kind of forum, today's meeting would exclude a high school teacher at Hellgate, for example, because they just couldn't get here, or a nurse on the 3rd floor of the hospital because they're running an afternoon shift or something like that. How do you get their input, because they care about the community too, into a discussion like this? And maybe it's a web-based sort of thing of a bulletin board where you can capture those kinds of things and someone can get on there at any hour of the day and post comments.
Sex log.
I think it's fair enough to consider it a leadership organization. There's nothing wrong with that term. But if it's sincere in being a leadership organization, then everybody that's a part of it is kind of duty-bound to go and observe and find young leadership or people who have that spark in them for leadership and inculcate them into an organization like this. I mean, it can be the focus as opposed to eyes or anything else. It has to do with leadership and trying to identify it in all its areas. And the other thing about getting people's input, the way you get people's input is not to invite them to a meeting. The way to get people's input is to go to them and ask them in their front yard or wherever. I mean, you identify people who you'd like their input, and then you go to them. And that works.
Some very successful efforts are to have kiosks in malls, around like the growth management issue of kind of laying out your game and having a couple people there and maybe having some web-based way for people to formalize their feedback. This is sort of get out there and talk to the peeps, is to go to places where they can address, that are not city hall or.
That is a common theme among most of the groups is that, some inventory information. And I think Missoula is one of the first communities in the country that's part of the national map. Fits into the idea of web-based, place-based, very local place-based information. Really,
The what?
the national map. It's run by the U.S. Geological Survey. It's an experiment on bringing local governments, federal government, state government, geographic information together and fed out freely available.
Sounds like a topic for the city club. Another kind of way of making that particular tool work is MCAP. It's the kind of thing that works really well with that medium. Are there other, maybe let's step away from this city club thing and kind of more back to Anne Mary's question. We've talked a little bit, we've tried to kind of press the notion of, okay, are there other ways to involve people? Maybe if we took it a little bit differently, are there other things that we need to really get people involved in? We've talked about a couple of things like that, but maybe that's another way of kind of coming at the question of how you get public involvement.
Say that one more time, Mike.
Are there other things in particular that we need to get people involved in? I know Deb is very interested in doing that with respect to the forest plan. I know we will be very interested in doing that with respect to a new growth policy. Okay. Guess not. Other things in common or things in other groups that you saw that you're particularly interested in or questions about? Okay, how about this whole forum, the way what's worked about what we've done here today and what hasn't worked? Is this a worthwhile way to spend an afternoon of your time? Are we getting something done, or are you going to wait and reserve judgment on that for a few months to see, or how can we improve this?
Or should we continue this?
Yeah.
I think it's very worthwhile because it makes you get together and talk about these things. Otherwise, it's kind of like Jack said in our meeting today. The only time people get fired up about something is when it's on their toes. And otherwise they got other things better to do and they're busy. So I think it is important. And maybe that's when you ask, how do you get everybody involved? You have strong neighborhood groups. You've created neighborhood groups in town now, and you've got other groups that have a lot of different things that they do. It's just I think a matter of giving them a forum to go to and participate, in your club thing. But I think if there's a place for them to go and express their views, and they're pushed a little bit, I think that it'll happen.
Like, I think part of the value is going to be determined on what happens from here. If these individual four groups get together and develop something more concrete to move forward with. I mean, dialogue is great, discussion is great, but dialogue and discussion that ends with no work product or nothing that moves forward is not going to bring much interest in future opportunities to be involved. And so, if the process then can develop something, whether it be in these action steps, we can take these action steps and develop them enough where something concrete can be developed that we can share with the community can see value coming out. Those who participate can see value. I think that will define some of the worthwhileness of our time.
Larry Flowers from NREL used a quote that when I was at a meeting, and he said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And if we don't continue to come to the table, we'll be on somebody's menu.
That's where you
May, you were right behind you.
I was just going to make the comment that a lot of the themes have talked about polarization, and we're talking about a growth plan now. That's another area of polarization. The forest is an area of polarization. I think one of the things that we can do is some sort of a model that says to everyone else in the community, there is an opportunity to come together and look at problems that don't polarize us. We can disagree, but we can come to the table and figure out how to make it work. And I think one of the things that we've seen in the recent history is the only time we come together, one of the reasons we come together is to try to build camps and polarize and find division instead of common ground.
I agree with everything she just said, and I also, I think is real helpful for me, these forums, is we all kind of run in our own circles, and I think what we've done here is brought lots of different circles together, and we're able to meet new people that work in different things and have different opportunities to work together and other stuff, so just bringing everybody together to me is really helpful.
So did everyone kind of try to take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, I think the point is to go back to those circles and bring information that you've gathered here and take it out. This is truly going to be a grassroots effort. We're going to take and pass it down and down and down to the grassroots. And I think, one of the things we should be charged with is to go to those circles of influence, whatever you want to call them, and say, hey, here's what's going on. You have the opportunity to participate in your government and make some decisions or assist in making some decisions, but you need to get out there and do it. And I think, this is an educational opportunity to say, hey, this is what's going on, and pass it on down.
If we decided to do this again in 6 months, and would it be appropriate for us to lay it out the same way, where we kind of have a smaller group that identifies a few working areas, we have a general overview, we go focus on those areas, then we come back to the larger group, we use facilitators. Does that seem like a decent process, the way it's worked here today?
Well, I'm hoping that somehow or another I'll get contacted again to start the conversation about legislative agenda and how we can encourage mixed-use redevelopment. And so I'm unclear about what happens next in the work that we did today. And so if I get clarity about that, I have a better understanding of what I sort of expect in 6 months. Because in 6 months, I hope that maybe us and another expanded group of people would come back and we'd be talking to each other about what we've been doing for the past 6 months related to what we did today. So I'm not clarity about follow-up to what we were doing today.
Yeah, I like the follow-up idea to what's the way down.
Should we do that as a group, or should we do that through email, or what works best? I mean, part of it is we're going in a number of different directions here. I mean, we've got some groups that said, well, these folks are going to get together and we're going to do this. Great. We've got others like the legislative group where I think that's more of an iterative process where we're going to kind of wait and see what Billings kind of comes up with in Great Falls and Bozeman, and and we're all going to try, I mean, this is how we've thought about this for legislative issues. We'll try to get together and say, all right, what do we have in common? You know, can we get together, can we get behind 3 different legislative initiatives? And I think then if we were able to, we'd come back to this group and say, okay, this is kind of what we have a political constituency that spreads across the state to do. What do you think? Are you willing to support that? We talk to your legislator. Will you take the time to drive to Helena and testify on this? That sort of stuff.
So it looks to me like though almost every group has said that they plan as a group, at least parts of the group, to get together to address their 2 or 3 or 4 issues. So the next time, if we just came back and kind of reported to make the progress, I mean, Deb's group has said she's going to get the city and the county, the school district, a bunch of planners together. We could just, it could be more of a report out than to try to think of some more things to work on.
How's that sound, Deborah? Is that?
Well, I thought we were tasked with a 12-month project of some sort, and that we got to choose those projects. And 6 months seems like an awful long time to wait to come back to what kind of progress has been made. So that sort of surprises me. I mean, we're the group that had people assigned to committees and jobs and said, let's do this. And I guess from my point of view, I think 6 months is too long to check back, but it doesn't have to be a physical meeting check back. It can be some kind of cooperative report check back.
How about if we met in 2 or 3 months and we did a lunch like today and went on till about 2 or 2:30?
I think that's swell. You lost a lot of people today.
Yeah, it's a whole afternoon is a big stretch, quite a commitment.
The key is you set a time and see who shows up. And you do it frequently enough so that even if it's a small meeting one time, you know, and that's the way things grow. It's not, you don't set up a structure, you just do something and see who shows up. And over a period of time, you know who's interested and you know if things are going to move along.
We will kind of, among those of us who've kind of been pulling this together, we'll get together with all this information. So if we don't kind of come to kind of how we're going to do it today, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, another way of kind of working this is we've got some working groups here, and what we can do is make sure that you have the email addresses of the various folks in the working groups, and so that you can kind of go and do what it is you said you were going to do, and then I think everyone else is going to want to hear how's that going, and you know, is there a place for me to kick in, or you know, should I cross to the other side of the street when I see you coming, or?
Mike, does the city club model, committee structure support kind of what we're talking about here? It seems like that there is some kind of holding environments where this information flows and people will be able to self-organize in a sort of way under a city club structure.
That's what I was going to say. Why don't we consider ourselves the founding members of a non-organized city club and meet together in September to report back from our committees?
Right, so it wouldn't be a weekly thing to start with.
No, we'll
But the subcommittees could do. Yeah, subcommittees self-organize and determine their own frequency, but there's an overarching city club type structure.
Are you gonna charge me $5 for cookies?
I figure we can get, you know, an $18 Portland lunch for $10 here. Yeah.
I think though that we need to, I know how much work Claire has put into this as a mayor's secretary, and she has called people and followed up and everything. So we just need to be, you're going to get an email, you put it on your own calendar, and you get yourself here. We're not going to babysit you. Here, here.
The other Jeff?
I was thinking about what Rosalie said about the boundaries. Maybe we could call it the Missoula Civic Club instead of the City Club and not try to impose a political boundary on it. Just an idea.
Other thoughts?
I kind of liked the country club.
Well, that was the county club.
I was scared to say it until you said it.
County bias raises its ugly head.
I couldn't stand it.
Dan?
Well, you know, my idea was sort of along these same lines, that it seemed to me that following up on the city club, rather than looking 6 months out and having another of these really made sense, and just kind of grow the city club as we go along. So I was thinking, you know, one possibility would be you could have a city club kind of meeting once a month here to start with, and you could have each of these groups report one at a time, so you could get a little bit fuller report. And at the same time, maybe you could have somebody that's actually working on the structure of the city club, because it is going to have to get worked out. So you could spend some time at each meeting working that out until you actually get it solidified. But you could also have a substantive part of it where one of these groups makes a report of each meeting.
Just one other thing, I think you can do it around pizza and brown bag lunches. In other words, there's pizza there, and if you don't like pizza, bring a brown bag lunch. I mean, that works in the beginning of an organization.
It's still food.
Yeah. That's what we always eat anyway.
Any other thoughts here? Some thank yous. Thank you to St. Pat's in particular for, first of all, having such a great facility that we can use and then letting us use it, and for the good food. That's one thing that is always an advantage to coming here. Is that you know you do have a heart attack Thank you to the moderators, the facilitators, Anne Mary, Ginny Tribe, Joy Earls, and Janet Stevens. And then to Claire in particular.
Yes.
I think that we're kind of getting near the end here. Kind of one last pass at any other summarizations. I would invite people to kind of pick up with those conversations that I interrupted an hour and a half ago. I mean, that's a part of what I think is worth creating here is the opportunity for that kind of networking to happen. So don't just race away. Anne Mary?
I'd like to share just two, what I thought were just two pearls from our group. And one of them was the whole idea of art and culture rooted in place, which ties together a lot of what we were all about today. The other was a reminder from my friend Doug, who 20 years ago or so said to me, you know, Anne Mary, he said, Missoula is the melting pot that refuses to melt. Now, I've since said that to a lot of people, and as I've told them, people think I made that up, so I didn't. But that leads to that whole idea of conflict as well as diversity. And I think the nubbins that came out of our group was diversity is what makes this place the place we love. And so I think the more that we can actually encourage and foster diversity and civilly engage in conflictual conversation is really what makes this place so doggone interesting.
So thank all of you for taking your afternoon and kind of making another contribution to our community. Hopefully you will feel like your investment is worthwhile.